All right, it is now my pleasure to bring to you Mr. Peter Cho and his paper, What is Right is Right, and What is Wrong is Right.
What is right is wrong, what is wrong is right. Just to have that clarified. All right. All ready? Why does it always rain when people die? I remember asking myself this question the day I heard my parents had collapsed from exhaustion while working in a factory. When they died that same day, my eyes didn't seem to know how to stop crying. Looking back, I'm not so sure if it rained more than it cried, or if I cried more than it rained. My parents, despite our poor living conditions during the Industrial Revolution, wanted me to be able to pursue my dream of teaching. To afford such an education, they forced themselves to work non-stop for a minimum wage in a dirty, cramped, and lifeless factory. Only after they were gone did I finally remember how tired they looked when they smiled, how hard they tried to hide their chapped hands and aching bodies, and how I, their son, Arthur Johnson, was never able to properly tell them, thank you, I'm sorry, or I love you. As these memories started to subside, I suddenly remembered the reason for my flashback. It was raining outside the church I was in. And I, now known as Mr. Johnson, was currently attending the funeral of one of the remaining relatives of one of my students. The student's name was Will. He was an extremely bright and hardworking boy. His maturity, especially his mannerism of speech, surprised me. His intelligence also, matching mine at sometimes, perked my interest. He soon became my student who I closely mentored. All of his parents were alcoholics and neglected Will. His uncle stepped in and became his guardian. For many years, Will learned what it meant to be loved and wanted. Until now. Once the funeral ended, I caught a glimpse of Will heading out of the church doors, wanting to talk and perhaps console Will. I slowly pushed through the crowd of people blocking the door. But when I finally exited the door, Will was nowhere to be seen. I walked around the area searching for Will, but it wasn't until I reached a closed-off edge behind the church did I finally find him. He was staring down at a 30-foot drop below him. Hearing me walk behind him, he turned his head, and I was met with an overwhelmingly empty expression, void of any emotion. His shoulders slumped, his eyes in focus, and his clothes drenched with rain caused him to look more dead than alive. He stood on the ledge, or it was a moment for me that I found a dreading realization. He stood on the ledge not to think or mourn for his dead uncle. He stood there, ready to walk off the ledge, guaranteeing death and ending his misery. In a heartbeat, I sprinted and cried out, Will! Before Will could react, I grabbed his wrist and pulled him away from the ledge. As soon as he processed what just happened, all of his apathy and hopelessness was immediately replaced with horror and anger. With all of his strength, he vainly tried to free his wrist from my hand. I tightened my grip and cried and told him, Will, calm down. After about an hour of struggling, Will gradually lost his strength while his lifeless expression returned. I led Will to my Model T Ford and drove him to my house while thinking of a way to convince him he was making a mistake. After giving him a dry towel and a change of clothes, he settled down at my kitchen table with a warm cup of tea. If there was any time his mind would be changed, it was now. I too then sat down and looked at Will. You don't have to respond right now, I began, but just listen. And he nodded. There's a story of a man known as Achilles, who had the choice between life and death. As a demigod, he was fiercely victorious in battle. However, there came a moment in his life where he was met with two decisions. Live a short but glorious life, guaranteeing or an intentional form of suicide, or live without achieving the same extent of glory. He chose to die early, with the hope that the people would continue to remember his glory. After he died, a comrade of his, Odysseus, managed to visit the underworld. When he spoke with Achilles, Achilles seemed to have regretted his decision of ending his life early, saying, better I say to break sod as a farmhand for some poor countryman on iron rations and lorded it all over the exhausted dead. Achilles realized something innately invaluable to purely living. While you're not some hero of Greek myth, you are much more alive than Achilles from the story. You're alive, breathing, and have so many opportunities simply because of the simple fact you are alive. Instead of choosing to, not wanting to use the word suicide, instead of choosing to give into the despair, guilt, or false hope that if you disappear, your problems will disappear, live, Will. Live. Will looked down and fiddled with his thumbs. He then spoke with surprising calmness and soundness of mind.
When someone loses something of the highest value, it is natural for one to despair. When a miser loses his wealth, which he diligently and perhaps greedily worked for, he despairs. Even when a child loses his toy, he cries and despairs also. Admittedly, not all those who experience loss react the same way I do, but this is due to the fact that their loss is reversible. The miser can yet again work and earn money. The child can also find a new toy or source of entertainment. My loss, however, is quite different in nature. Unlike material objects, life can never be given back or replaced. My uncle, the one who I love more than anyone else, who gave me hope and purpose again, will never come back. Thus, I no longer have, nor can regain, the desire to live with this gaping hole in my life.
I stood baffled at the fact a 14-year-old had just tried to justify suicide. I soon regained my composure and opened my mouth to rebut Will's justification. But right before I spoke, a golden opportunity had presented itself in front of me. Normally, a boy who had recently experienced a traumatic grief would be unable to think. But Will was different. Will was extremely intelligent and logically driven. Then again, I never expected that same intelligence to believe and conclude that such a tragic end was necessary. Still, if I could manage a logical discussion and conclude without a doubt it was a moral atrocity to end his own life, I could at least postpone his self-drawn deadline, if he continued his reasoning.